I learned about it through asking questions to an angel about my life. And the angel would answer questions.
You would be sitting down speaking to what in your perception was an actual angel, or like, can you elaborate?
Here's the elaboration. It starts when I got invited to Sweden because I'd written a book called The Dancing Woolly Masters that won that award for physics that I mentioned. And at the same time, I had just broken up with a woman, and I didn't have relationships. I was addicted to sex.
This was like what, 20 to 40 years old, or how old were you?
Oh, I was addicted to sex through my 30s.
And you wrote, just for context, The Seed of the Soul you wrote at what time? How old were you when that came out?
It was published in 89. Okay, so this is a good question. So anyway, frightened parts of my personality were in pain, grief, despair, loss, all of that. And that's a lot. And I went to the desert. I went to visit a fellow that I'd met, a Jungian analyst. His name is Robert Johnson. He wrote some books. He, we, she. He was brilliant. And he said, why don't you drive down here and spend some time with me? So I did. I went to San Diego. And after a few days, he said, why don't you go into the desert and become enlightened? That's how it's traditionally done. Robert is low on social skills, laconic and wonderful. I didn't get enlightened, but I did go to the desert. And I stayed there weeks, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And in that time, I learned how to understand my dreams. And I started to learn about myself. And then I realized I want to go to this invitation because I was invited to Sweden, but I couldn't go because I couldn't even speak. I was in so much loss and despair. And I thought, now I'm going to go. So I went home to tell my dad I love him. I realized that for the first time. And that began a change. I don't think in him, maybe, in him, but certainly in me. And then I went to Sweden. First night there, everybody's jet lagged. There's 4 presenters. I'm one of them. Edgar Mitchell, the founder of the Institute of Noetic Science and an Apollo 14 astronaut, was another one of co-presenter with me, and 2 more. And the organizer of the retreat, it was not a retreat, it was a conference. And he said, I'm so glad that you're here. It's a welcome to Sweden. All the big companies are here, the telecoms, the banks, Volvo, Saab. And I have a surprise for you. We were just jet lagged. But he took us into this room. There was this man sitting on a chair, middle age, and his son. He's speaking in Swedish. They close the door, and he becomes someone else. His personality changes into what he says is a 3,000-year-old Egyptian named Umbris. All right, I'm just jet-lagged. I'm not really that interested. So the next morning, Jan, the conference organizer, comes to me again in the lobby and says, you can speak with Umbris anytime you want. And I didn't realize what a nice offer, what a really good offer that was, because a lot of people are lined up to speak with Umbris in Sweden. And even though my experience had been shallow, I was curious. So I said, I would like to. So he took me to the room again, same thing. The man, his son, Sture and his son, and Sture becomes Umbris. So the first thing that Umbris said captured my attention completely and permanently. He said, how did you learn to understand your dreams in the desert? Andre, no one knew about that. Robert knew that I was in the desert, but he didn't know what happened. My parents didn't even know about a desert, but Umbris knew. He knew all about it. And I realized this is not something for me to flippantly dismiss anymore. This is real, even though I don't believe it's real. This is real. And so we talked, and he told me, Gary, a little flame has been ignited in you. It's a little flame. It's like a candle in a cathedral. And you need to feed the flame, or it'll go out, or it could go out. And wow, that alarmed me. I said, so it could go out? And he said, yes, you could fall. I said, well, how do I feed the flame? And he said, you must need to talk to people. I said, Umbris, that's what I can't do. After 3 weeks in the desert, I'd go to get groceries in a little store, and the clerk would say, "Good morning, sir." And I couldn't talk. I was so deep in myself. Everything it was like intimidating in a way. And then Umbris took both my hands like this, and his grip was strong, really strong. And he said, "Will you speak with people?" There's no convincing me. It was a question. And I felt fear, I felt trepidation, and then I said, yes. Let go of my hands, and our conversation ended. And I went outside, and there was a group of people right outside the doorway in the hall talking. And I said, hi. Immediately, the universe had given me an opportunity to implement the decision I had just made. And I found out later from Jan, this was a conference on decision making. I met Umbris one more time in Sweden, and I asked him, "Why do you have to talk to me through someone who speaks Swedish, who speaks to his son, who speaks English, who translates it into me, and then the other way back? Why can't you just talk to me?" I was sort of challenging him. "Why can't you just talk to me?" And he said, "Yes, I could. Could you hear me?" And I knew the answer as soon as I heard the question. That's the beginning of this story. Years later, I meet another woman, and early on, she says to me, playfully, "I channel a non-physical entity. Would you like to meet it?" And because of my experiences with Umbris, I said, "Yes, I want to." And I said, "What is this non-physical entity?" And she said, "He says he's an angel." I said, "Well, does the angel have a name?" And she said, "He says, you can call me Genesis." So I said, "Yes, I want to meet Genesis." So we got in a room. We were in a larger house that was private and quiet. And she channeled Genesis. She closes her eyes. She can't remember anything afterwards. And she seems to go to sleep. And Genesis appears. Genesis says, "How can I help you?" And I wanted to say, "Genesis, I can't stop thinking about sex. I can't stop looking for sex. I can't stop having sex. And I have herpes. Can you please help me?" But I didn't say any of that. I said, "Well, I have some experiences I'd like to discuss with you, and I've picked up something along the way I hope you can help me with." And Genesis said, "Let us move into healing, shall we?" Just like that. And he answered my question, not the one I asked, the one I needed to ask. We talked the whole morning. We took a break, talked again, talked twice in the afternoon. This was September the 1st, I think, early September 1985. That was my first talk with Genesis. And Genesis said, over the course of a day, the issue is not sexuality for you. The issue is the nature of love. So immediately, he had taken my concerns with my addiction to sex and my herpes into a larger, more meaningful context. And then later, as we discussed more, he said, the issue, the issue for you is the nature of power. And I thought, but what has power got to do with all of this? But he kept explaining. And I never stopped talking with Genesis. And then after 2 years, our engagement unraveled. And this was very concerning to me because not only was I going to lose her, I was going to lose my access to Genesis. And she was living on a far away Midwest, and I was on the West Coast, and we were at her home, and I was driving back one night, close to when we were going to leave. I was going to leave. and I had a thought. And immediately after the thought, I had another one. Genesis put that thought in my head. Genesis did it. I think he did. I could hardly wait to get back and talk with him again. And I don't know if it's a he. I asked him, what are you once? And he said, I'm an impersonal energy dynamic. And gave me some more description too. And I said, did you put that thought in my mind? And he said, yes, I did. Can you remember the voice you heard when you heard that thought? And then I realized, yes, I can. I can. And Genesis said, well done. Communication is established. Me, you will not lose. And I never have. That was about 40 years ago.
You went on a 5-year journey thereafter, eventually coming to the writing of The Seed of the Soul, correct?
A 5-year journey. Oh, you mean from
84 to 89?
The Seed of the Soul was published in 89.
Got it.
But written before that. And
yeah. So you went on quite the journey there.
Yes, but you're giving me credit for much more than I could take credit for. I wanted to share what I had learned over those 2 years from Genesis. So I did. It's not mine. It's Genesis. The Seed of the Soul, everything in it. Everything I'm telling you that I know from my experience now came first from Genesis. It was fun for me. It wasn't, I used to think, writing a book, well, The Dancing Woolly Masters, the book on physics, was fun, pure fun. I love my intellect. That's why I was talking to you about intellect. I know about it. It's a joy, but it's limited. I wrote, to the best of my ability, what I learned from Genesis. And toward the end, I didn't know if I could do it well enough, so I asked Genesis, would it be okay if I use some of your words? He said, yes, Gary. And I wrote the book, and it got published. And just before it was published, I was in Mount Shasta. I had moved there by then. And I was musing. I thought, The Dancing Woolly Masters got a rave review in the New York Times the day before it was published. I mean, 2/3 of a newspaper page with a picture of me in it, completely laudatory, not one critical remark. And I thought, well, what is the New York Times going to think about this book, which is about reincarnation, evolution, and the soul? They just write something savage about that. They didn't even notice it. But Genesis said, don't worry yourself. This arrow will find its mark.